thank you for your day. We thank you, Lord, for everything that you've done, everything we know you're going to do. And we pray, Lord, that you would be with us tonight. Be with us tonight. Be a part of this meeting. Be in this meeting. Guide this meeting. Direct us, Lord, that we can say things and do things that will be pleasing in your sight and that will be a blessing to our community. Lord, we love our community and we ask you to bless the beloved community. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
So we're happy tonight to have with us Brother Spike Moss. And Spike is one who, I mean, when I came to Minnesota over 20 years ago now, Spike had been just Spike. He's reached out to me and we have worked together on a whole lot of projects. Spike has been in the community, been doing things. We did things together. Everything from gang summit to everything. We've done those things with One Love, and I'm happy to have him to be with us tonight. I think you're going to see, in addition to people like Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King that we talked about last week, we're going to see tonight there's some local people who are doing things, who are making things happen in light of what happened back in the civil rights movement days. And you know, me being a baby boomer, I have to let everybody know I'm a baby boomer. I came of age in the 60s. And so I have to begin, I can't talk about coming to age in the 60s without talking about the civil rights movement, because that civil rights movement that we came through, it still grips us today. And it defines us in so many ways. Because I think about it, after slavery itself in the Civil War, no event of movement in the last 400 years has affected the racial climate in America today more than the civil rights movement. Things were done, and I lived it. I keep on saying, if you read the book, I read a book that kept on saying, I lived it. How the Word is Passed. That's the name of the book, How the Word is Passed. That's a book I recommend to you. And at the end of the book, the people who were involved in the book, some older people kept on saying, I lived it. I lived it. I actually lived through that movement. And I can sit here tonight and say, I lived that. I lived it. Things were done and said in those days that need to be known to those who weren't there. People need to know what we've come through in order to get where we are now, wherever that is. But we've come through some stuff. I could take you through some stuff in the 60s that happened with my family, with my dad and others. But the most eloquent spokesman of that time was Dr. Martin Luther King. And Dr. Martin Luther King, his vision was a description of the situation that gave rise to the movement. But then outside of Dr. King, I remember other people like Reverend Killingworth and Reverend Dr. W.L. Russell and Reverend Son Patton and Reverend Lowe and Buddy Eccles. I mean, the list goes on. People who had gave voice to this movement, to the thing that was happening. And without their voice, without them speaking up, I don't know what would happen. You know, during that time of great segregation. I mean, legally mandated separation, but Spike, legally mandated separation of races of all kinds of levels, separate schools, separate motels. You couldn't go to certain motels. You had to have that green book to know what motel to go to. Separate restroom, separate swimming pools, separate drinking fountains, separate restaurant. It was like being Black with some kind of disease. That's the kind of era I grew up in. And to see where we've come from as a rise, because of those who spoke up during that time, during the civil rights movement. Thank God for Dr. King. But Dr. King motivated other people to rise up and to take a stand in various communities. He motivated other people to march. I participated in my share of marches over the years, even walking out of school to demand some rights because of what they were doing to Black students in a school. So Dr. King didn't really spark that civil rights movement. You know, it really sparked by Rosa Parks. But things were done and said during that time that people today need to know about. That's why I challenge you all, everybody who listen, get to know your history, get to know your heritage, read Black books. Black books were not taught. We were not allowed to it was not presented to us in schools, in high school, in college, even in seminary. We didn't have no Black books. We were not required to read. We were required to read a whole lot of books, but no Black authors. And I kept wondering, where are the Black folks? We have no Black theologians. But now that I am where I am now, my journey is getting to know my heritage, my history, understanding it, and knowing there are Black writers. There were Black writers then. There are Black writers now. So I challenge you all to read about your history, because when you begin to read, you're going to see where this country is headed right now. And one of the books you need to read is read President Obama book, and then you're going to be able to see what's happening with Mr. McConnell and these people today, and they how they are doomed for us to fail. When McConnell makes statements like African Americans have voting just like Americans, I mean, what are you saying? We're not Americans? You know, he make that. But when you read Obama's book, you find out he meant exactly what he was saying, because his whole thing was, I'm going to make sure that Obama fails. That's the thing he kept on saying throughout Obama's presidency, and that's what he's saying right now doing Joe Biden president. His thing is to make sure they fail, because there's a rise, there's a movement that's going on that's really trying to keep people of color from being in the majority. So there's a threat, and because of that threat, that's why you see the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers and QAnon and all these people rising up, because they're afraid of what may happen if the Blacks are in the majority. Even at the polls, I mean, they're trying to make it right now, so make it so hard for Black people to vote. I mean, people fought for this right to vote. Now they want to make it so hard for us to vote because they don't want us to come out to vote, because Trump lost, and because the 2 Senate races were lost in Georgia, that really inflamed people, white folks, let me say it like this, that they don't want to see this happen anymore. So they're redistricting, they're doing all this stuff, and we've got to pay attention to it. And if there's been a time we need to get out and vote, we need to make sure we vote during the midterm like never before. So with that in mind, I haven't spoken tonight. I just want to kind of to give that a precursor to what we're going to talk about. So, Brother Spike, can you just tell us something about who you are, and maybe say something along the lines of what I just said a few minutes ago? And are you a baby boomer? You don't have to tell me your age. Oh, you're on mute. Unmute yourself. Unmute yourself, Brother Spike.
You hear me now?
We hear you now.
Okay. Well, when I say I'm a Jim Crow baby, let me first thank you for your honesty about the struggle. I was born in a little town, a farm town called Paris, Missouri, northeast corner of Missouri. And when I say I was born in Jim Crow, I was born in my grandfather's home on the kitchen table. We had about 170 miles to the nearest hospital that would accept Blacks. So about 30% of my mother's family lost their life on that journey trying to get to those hospitals, because even if you called an ambulance, they wouldn't come that far, and if they did, it'd be a waste of time. So a lot of her family died on that journey just trying to get to the number 2 hospital that accepted Blacks. And my first 3 brothers and sisters all died on that table from midwives, you know, because you have no doctor, you have no nurse. If there's any problems, that's pretty much it. So I was the first to make it. And when I survived, my mother put her middle name on me, my father put his middle name, and my mother also nicknamed me Spike. But when I would go home, I had to constantly deal with Jim Crow. Everything was the back door, or no Negroes allowed, or signs everywhere. no public park, no public school, no library, even though you were taxpayers being forced to live with a taxation without representation. And so you couldn't even go to the things you were paying for. And 99% of what people were doing here at that time, we were not allowed to do down there. My mother and them came here for better jobs. But when they got here, Jim Crow was alive and well in Minnesota. We did not know in that time, because Minnesota was listed as a non-slave state, that Minnesota bought and sold slaves. And so Blacks lived on the south side of a street called Glenwood Avenue. And they came across Glenwood and across Ocean Highway when they built the government-owned projects. And in the projects, they built a park where we played called Sumner Field. And Blacks were mandated to live on the east side of the federal buildings, projects, and whites on the west, and never allowed to mix. I'm looking at this as a little boy who left the South that's here in Minnesota. We did not dare to go over Northeast unless you were big enough to fight back and defend yourself. You couldn't ride through Glenwood out to Golden Valley without being disturbed or pulled over by the cops. And back then you didn't walk on what's called Plymouth Avenue. A squad car would be called to ask you Negroes, what you doing on this avenue? Turn around and go back. If you didn't, you got your whooping under the bridge of either Broadway or Plymouth, or you went to jail. So we didn't even know there was a Broadway because we weren't allowed to walk on Plymouth. But I will say this, there's a street now called the Nicollet Mall. Back then it was Nicollet Avenue. And then it was Woolworths, Powers, SS Kresge's, Dayton's, and Donaldson's. And they all had soda fountains facing that street. But when you walked to the soda fountain, the napkin counter had a note, they don't serve colored people here in Minneapolis. So everything that was going on in the South was going on in Minnesota. When we arrived here, we were treated the exact same. By us being in the projects, the kids that were in the projects, they were so close to the white homes, they abandoned them homes. When they abandoned them homes, families like mine were able to come up from Glenwood and go across into the neighborhood and rent those first homes. And for the first time, we were beyond the Blacks who actually lived in the projects, who were living again in the most discrimination. As a matter of fact, Pilgrim Church in St. Paul was built by those first slaves who arrived, and they came up from Boone Island. When St. Paul felt there was too many Blacks in that city, they sent us to Minneapolis. When we came to Minneapolis, we struggled so tough, the Pilgrims started a church in Minneapolis that's still here called Zion, but back then it was called Zion Missionary Baptist Church. The missionary was to help us get on our feet, coats, gloves, hats, a place to lay down and sleep. Out of that church came the Phyllis Wheatley Settlement House to help us get settled. But for all the Blacks who were athletes and professional and entertainers, you had to go to the Wheatley because Minnesota did not rent rooms to those famous people downtown. So we met all the Black celebrities because they lived upstairs in the Phyllis Wheatley. That's where they could get a room. They also ate in the kitchen because you weren't allowed to go downtown and eat in the restaurants. You ate in the Phyllis Wheatley kitchen, you showered in the Phyllis Wheatley showers downstairs, and you slept upstairs in those bedrooms. So those were the first exposures to me that we came up north and didn't go far enough. And the reason we didn't go far enough, everything is south after Canada. So when we went in here, there was a lot of disrespect and racism in the schools. And it was a lot all through the city. Every Black doctor that came here, Dr. Brown, Dr. Brown Jr., Dr. Johnson, you had to raise or have enough money to open your own practice because they didn't allow Black doctors and Black nurses in their hospitals. It was the 70s when the Jewish community built a church over south, Mount Sinai. When they built that church, anyone who had a degree in medicine could finally work there, and Blacks flocked there because the practice had lasted too long of keeping us out of Hennepin County and all the other hospitals. We did not get the loans for the businesses. We raised our own money, and we barely got the loans for the mortgages. And once we got them, here they come with what's called eminent domain and took a lot of our property. Our first businesses was on Ocean Highway, and it would work down towards the Twin Stadium. But they said there was going to be a freeway built through there, and they used eminent domain, tore down all of our businesses, and then they never built the freeway there. They built the freeway east of there going north and never touched the area where they ridded themselves of the visibility of our children, knowing we could do business, we could own businesses too. They tore them down and it never came back. So I don't see anything that was actually different in the South and the North, other than they would speak to you sometime and even shake your hand, but they treated you the same way. Minnesota has been part of the worst 5 states towards people of color as long as I can remember, and it still is. It's in that grouping with Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana, and Michigan, and they've always been the worst states. Whites are somewhere between 74, 76% of all the mortgages. All the people of color together don't make up 20%. Whites are about 99% of the owners of all the businesses in this state. Black people don't own half of 1% of the businesses in this state. Our income a year ago, we were at 62, 63%, 62, 63,000 for the average white family, but we were up at 27%. We're now worse than the 27%, and they're up in 20 and 80 some thousands. And the banking system here was also the worst banking system in the history of America towards Blacks. And of those banks, Wells Fargo treated us the worst, but all the banks here redlined against Black people consistently, and they said it was wrong and illegal, but they've never stopped it. So your opportunities here were less than worse than Mississippi. When I had my radio show and I had a column in the Spokesman, I used to always say that Minnesota was the Mississippi up north. Now that I see the facts and statistics, I can no longer say it. Blacks in Mississippi own more homes than Blacks in Minnesota. Blacks in Mississippi own more businesses than Blacks in Minnesota. Blacks in Mississippi had more children graduate than Blacks in Minnesota. And Blacks in Mississippi send more children to college and graduate than Minnesota. And Blacks in Mississippi have more Black elected officials than Minnesota. So you can't even bring up Mississippi because we are worse than them, even though the city of Minneapolis was listed for a long time as the 4th richest city in the entire world, not just the country. So discrimination and racism is alive and well. I used to go to the Capitol every year and protest because they could give legally a permit under freedom of speech for all the racist groups to come and protest and spit their poison every year. And that's where we found out that Minnesota was full of the Klan. It was full of Aryan race. It was full of skinheads and Nazis. And they would stand on that steps and spit that poison every year. But I also found out that Indiana would average about 48 to 49,000 Klan members. Illinois would be right around 28, 29,000. Over there in Wisconsin, they would hit 24, 26,000. Minnesota would hit about the same, and Michigan would hit over 60,000. So the Midwest, to me, what I can see is the racist area towards people of color in the entire country. And collectively, they have more Klan members than all of the South put together in this 5-state area, more than all of the South put together. So we were looking at the South, not understanding that the enormous hate was here in the Midwest.
Well, that's one of the topics. I'm glad you brought it up. That's one of the things we're going to talk about on this show later on. We're going to talk about the Great Migration. And there is such thing as a Great Migration. And because people came from the South, coming north with expectation, I won't be treated the same like I was treated in the South. But you get here, and then as soon as you get here, you find out it's the same thing, or maybe even worse, when it comes down to where you're treated because of the color of your skin. So, so you pretty much answered one of my first questions I wanted to throw at you. You did answer that, but because I wanted you to talk about what racism looked like in the past in Minnesota and what does it look like now. So you gave us a good scenario of what happened then, but what about now? Has anything, what has changed and what has not changed?
Well, like I said, they still have the largest income. We're nowhere close to them. They still own all the mortgages and most of the property. We're nowhere close to them. They are 99% of who owns all the businesses. And like I said, we don't own half of 1%. There is no business or organization in Minnesota that does not participate in racism. We've had almost 100% Black white officers on the police department. I started dealing with police brutality in 1966 when they beat up a 14-year-old Black girl in the middle of downtown Minneapolis for no apparent reason other than enjoy themselves. And it sparked the first rebellion in North Minneapolis. that left downtown and spilled over into North Minneapolis when they beat that 14-year-old girl with batons for no reason. We're the only state that's had 6 rebellions. There's no other state that can say they had 6 rebellions. When Floyd was killed, we ended up with 3 more, North Side, South Side, and St. Paul, which means we had 9. There's no state to my knowledge that had 9 different rebellions except Minnesota. Also, when Martin Luther King died, they believed that Black people in Minnesota no longer had leaders. They would go to the corner of Penn and Plymouth and go east in their cars and just fire at everybody Black, which sparked the Black Patrol. As Black men and women and teenagers fought back with guns in Minneapolis for 91 days, the South Side leader was Stanley King from Sabanthony. The Native Americans was Clyde Belcourt, and we were the North Side. And we fought back for 91 days, but because Minnesota owned Channel 4, 5, 9, and 11, the nation did not know there was a race war here with guns for 91 days to this day, just like they finally know about Black Wall Street in Tulsa. Nobody knows about that gun battle here because this state kept out of the national news all these years, the racism and the hate here, and posted up like they were the best liberal state in the country. So nothing has changed in terms of the treatment. Think about me fighting police brutality cases for 52 years, winning 99% of the lawsuits and lost 100% of all charges against white officers. When you want to speak about how dirty it is here, the city council didn't lay them off, didn't suspend them, didn't fire them. The Civil Rights Department didn't fire them, didn't charge them. The Human Rights Department didn't do it. And they were voting on what the Civil Rights and the Human Rights Department could do or not do, and it never benefited us. So then you go to the Capitol, no one stood up and changed any laws to protect us, from the commissioners to the governor. So you go in city council to the mayor, no one stood up in 51 years and denounced what was going on that you witnessed with Floyd.
Wow. You know, Spike, it's been a movement, activism since the civil rights movement. I brought it up first, but then there have been other activism, other movements like the Million Man March, and I even attended. Me and Shelby has both attended the 20-year anniversary of the Million Man March in D.C. That's a movement. We've had the I Can't Breathe movements, the Diane movements, the Hands Up, Don't Shoot, Black Lives Don't Matter, Black Lives Matter. All these movements today, and it come down. The activism of today, to me, is saying justice or else. So what are you feeling about is there a need for activism to continue like we did back in the days, to the marches and the going to the Capitol? Is it a need for the younger people, like we're seeing that the other uprising? So let's look at activism back then and activism now, and maybe see what we can do to improve our relationships.
Well, back then, you had the civil rights movement up front. You had the Black nationalists up front, the Black Power movement up front, and people were pushing hard. King's group believed in nonviolence because they knew how savage the South would treat them once they stepped out in the street in protest. And they did everything King thought they would do. They threw everything they could throw at them. They hit them with everything they could hit them with. Their favorite weapon was wrapping barbed wire around axe handles and ball bats. And they loved to beat us and then drag us to jail bloody, not the hospital. Let us bleed in our cell, take their time getting us to court and a lawyer or bail. And we stood up against Jim Crow. However, here's what plagues us. When we were on the plantation for that 240 years, in our mind, most of us were mastered. So the chains and shackles are off our wrists and our ankles. But in our mind, since King to this moment, too many of us are mastered and still unwilling to stand up. White folks could always look and say, they ain't ready yet. It's just a handful of them standing up in each city. The people themselves are not galvanized and standing up. And that's what kept us from big gains and having to repeat what we do, because they come out with helicopters and everything else and literally count to see if we're ready to make them change. But if we're not going to make them change, no, they will not do it on their own. They won't do it because it's right. And a big part of that, to be honest with you, you went to school yourself. Look at this country's founders. They will teach you in school how famous they are, how great they were, but they never acknowledge these people were gangsters and thugs and criminals who engaged in the theft of this land through force, through beatings and murder, who engaged in the murder of Native Americans, women and children, who left them with 2 to 3% of the land when they actually used to live on 82 to 83%. They legally drew up 400 treaties. They broke all 400. For us, they kept us in bondage for 240 years, and some of us hid us after slavery was over in the woods and kept working us. And when they couldn't do that, then they created the chain gang and took us back into slavery. So you're talking about a people that won't change. We have to change. We have to galvanize ourselves in every way and get past the madness that slavery has put in us and changed our minds from the respect we had for one another, the love we had for one another, and the protection we had for each other. We got to now rebuild all of that if you expect to stand up. They got a greater chance because more white people are woke up. But because of your opening remarks about this country, I don't really know, Pastor, how much time we have. And I'm saying this from this perspective. When they started pushing all this hatred on TV shows in America, and Channel 9, Fox, all these people was spitting this hate every single week. They've had 20 some years of that, developing the minds of white people to hate, not just be racist, but move forward with the hate. So behind that, if you remember, white families, man, father and his kids was going in the woods, putting on all their suits and practicing for a racial war. They did that for the last 17, 18 years. They were out there in their military clothes, preparing themselves to kill the black and brown people. So all of a sudden, here comes the second coming of Hitler called Donald Trump. And they made him their savior because the first words out of his mouth is, I'm gonna build a wall and run the brown people out of here. Well, they rallied then. They now have a leader to do what they've been waiting for in all these different cities and in these different woods everywhere, practicing for this war. So it reached a fever pitch in front of the world when they attacked their own democracy, their own capital. So it sends a signal that we should pay attention to we might not have enough time to do what we got to do, but we still got to do it. I believe they will force the race war by shooting us at will wherever they want, beating us by will wherever they want, like they did in that protest in Carolina when they were beating them brothers with cane sticks and drove that car over that white woman. I think that's what they're going to do. When Floyd died here, there was a young man, white, and a young woman, white, standing there watching the protest, and an officer shot them both in the face. They weren't breaking the law, they weren't doing anything, but I believe it was a message to stay away from what they're doing. They shot them both in the face. If they were doing something wrong, you could have still shot them in the foot or the leg. They shot them in the face. They're sending messages that this racism is all right. And that's the reason police were allowed to do what they want to do all these years. So I don't know if we have the time, but I will agree you have to build a movement. But this movement has to be a movement of total survival. They're coming at your right to exist now.
Right. I'm glad you brought that up about coming together and about the second coming of Hitler, Donald Trump, because, you know, all these people who are still following him, all these politicians, the first thing coming out of their mouth when they want to win an election is we're going to do away with the critical race theory that's taught in schools and no more critical race. And they, even in churches, they want nobody making white folks feel bad for what they've done. Don't want them to understand the slavery that like we could just forget that. It should just go away. Don't mention that. Don't teach that no more.
That was the past. Leave it alone.
That's what they say. And you know, now I'm realizing they didn't teach us the history they taught us. It was glamorizing whiteness, but they never told anything about black folks doing anything other than picking cotton.
Well, even white folks, my point is, they were lying as they were teaching their history. They were hoodlums, thugs, and gangsters. Who else? I mean, think about it this way, Pastor. When he arrived here, there was over 20 million Native Americans. When he got done slaughtering, there was close to 12 million still alive. He's living on 83% of the land. When you got done, he had 2 to 3% of the land. So, and the rape of the women and children was no different than the rape of the women and children and men when we were slaves. They raped the men too. They raped them by tying them down. You got to remember, many of the masters that had plantation was also homosexual. So we went through it in a full circle, not just the abuse. And then remember that in the beginning, we were treated like their property. They held us on the ground and they took a branding iron and brand us with their name. And what happened was, when you go back to the slave block and you got these brands all over them from the different plantations and you got these whip marks all over them, they consider that damaged property. At the point they considered that, they said, just give them the name of your plantation, your name. And all of a sudden, then you become Mr. Moss. You see what I'm saying? But we were branded like their cows, their pigs, their horses, and their sheep. So I'm just saying, it takes a wicked person to do that. And he'll tell you, well, the past is the past. No, it's not. We are still suffering from the scars of that. We've never received any reparations. Nobody's ever told us about trauma. We didn't even know what trauma was. Most people don't know what it is today. We live out of that trauma. That's why we can go from sane to crazy in 1.2 seconds. That's generations of being traumatized. And that's what it does to you. So we gave him a break by not telling him about his guilt either and what he should be ashamed of. Whatever he said, do, that's what we did. So we really don't talk about slavery, how it really affected us. Native Americans, what I love about them, they talk about how it really affected them, but they speak as a group. Because we were broke up from being a group, we don't do that.
You mentioned a few minutes ago about that there need to be some changes. We need to come together. You don't know if we have enough time or not. What kind of changes? I mean, what we need to do as a community, what changes need to be made in the Black community to improve our race relationships, or improve us as a people, Black first? Then can we play a part in improving the race relations?
Well, first of all, a lot of what we did was still work. We've got to teach our young men and young women, we are African-American people. We got to teach them about our great history and our great culture. We got to then rebuild the respect and the love that we lost. We have never been at the place where we are now, where there's so much hate between Black males, so much hate between Black males and white females, and so much hate towards our children, which allows us to shoot our boys, our girls, and our babies. So we got to now work on the mental thing of us being confused and lost about who we are, and took away the love. I mean, think about it this way, Pastor. Most of our women, 30% of their life without a normal relationship with a Black man. We don't want to be bothered with them. We don't want to raise kids with them. We don't want to be their husband. 30% of their life, they go alone. And even in the Twin Cities, you can pick the restaurant of your choice on a Friday or Saturday night. You're going to see tables full of Black women out having dinner with each other. Where are you at, Black man? Because of the hate you got for your woman, you don't lift her anymore. You're talking about the foundation of the Black family not being lifted anymore, being disrespected and not protected, and now slaughtered. And so she's not in the gang, she's just a Black woman. And we use the N-word on each other, so we now can kill each other. We got to teach against that type of madness. We got to stop radio stations from all this bad music, disrespectful music. They don't do that to no other group of people. There's no songs out there disparaging and disrespecting white people when they sing. So why are you doing all these crazy songs where we got to call our women bees and hoes, and we got to call ourselves the N-word in our music? That's part of our contract. And then they play it, and then we start repeating it, hate again. One of the things I taught a lot of college students across this country, wherever I speak, Black men use too high of a measuring stick for Black girls. And it goes like this. She's too dark, she's too light, she's too skinny, she's too fat, she's bow-legged, she's pigeon-toed, she's sleuth-footed, she's knock-kneed, she's gap-toothed. I don't like her eyes, I don't like her nose, I don't like her hair, it ain't long enough, it's too long, it's the wrong color. I don't like her attitude, she's too loud. I said, you name a million reasons not to be with a Black woman, but you come to all Black function, 475-pound white girl with a wooden leg, glass eye, talking about you in love, but you don't love ours. And that's important. We got to re-love ourselves so we can re-love her. And I tell a lot of young people, if you respect yourself, you protect yourself. You protect yourself if you respect yourself. Without that, how are you going to be able to love someone else and you don't love you? And we got to build that in our males, build it back with our women, and give it back to our children.
Listen, I thank you. Listen, that really means a lot to hear you say that. What role? I know you've done a lot of stuff all over the country, participated in a lot of movements, and started a lot of marches, so to speak, and movements. I know you've done that because we did one here in Minneapolis, the One Love movement. Mm-hmm. Can you talk about maybe some things that you've done over the years that you know made a difference in the Black community, and for a time it at least brought us together? It made a difference. Can you talk about some things you've done, and what role does the church play in that today? I mean, because I know there have been people who they're trying to wipe the church out right now. Mm-hmm. What role does the church play today to try to help our community? You mentioned family. Without families, we don't have any church. No. With broken families, the church is broken. But what role does the church play in all this, and maybe some of the movements you've done in the past? And was the church included in some things you've done in the past?
Well, first of all, that's the institution that built all the institutions that we have. You don't have no church in St. Paul, you wouldn't have got no church in Minneapolis called Zion. You don't have no Zion, you don't have no Phyllis Wheatley Settlement House. You don't have no church, you don't have no OYCs today called Summit Academy. You don't have no Urban League, you don't have no NAACP. All of that came from the church. You don't have our first colleges and universities. If it didn't come directly from the church, it came from the congregations of the church. So our future is tied to going back to our roots. Where is that? Our foundation, God. Where's that? In the house of the Lord. So you get a generation to think like white people, that religion is no longer important, the pastor is no longer important, the church is no longer important, and now you see what's left, devilment. And so the church has to stay right where it is and engage in everything I'm saying in terms of teaching young Black people, you are an African people, born in America. Here's your history, here's your culture, here's how we live, here's how we go forward. We are one. You got to engage in all of that to be able to save this generation. Without it, it's kind of like when you go to school, it might be kindergarten, but then it's going to be first grade. That's the way we got to do this generation. That we got to go A, B, C with them, because everything that most of us have, they have never had. They never had a real mama, too many of them. Never had a real daddy, too many of them. Never had religion, never been to a church, never been to Sunday school, too many of them. Nobody doing the homework with them. Come home from school, nobody's in the house. Get up in the morning, leave, nobody walks you out. I mean, too many kids without proper guidance from adults is also at the root of it. So the church's role, meet those minds and bring those minds back where they're supposed to be. Help women understand their responsibility and role to be good women and good mothers. Help these brothers do the same thing, because they're disconnected from our real reality is our problem, and they're lost. We got to save them and bring them back. They've called our girls the B word so much, our girls call themselves that. They call each other the N word so much, all of them call each other that. We got to challenge that, get up for the last challenge. I said to all the pastors up in Bishop Howe's church, this is a spiritual war. And in a spiritual war, the spiritual generals are our pastors. And the war house is the church. And your spiritual generals got to be ignited to go one more time, because all of our gains came from spiritual leaders. King wasn't the only spiritual leader. They were all spiritual leaders. That's where our strength came from. How we really got over. We got over with God. I tell people all the time, you ain't got to be a religious fanatic, but you need to know and believe in God. And we got to teach this to a generation that only thinks they need the church and God when one of them die. We need to do the funeral in the church. They don't feel there's any other reason to be in the church. That's our job, to brag about that history of the church and how long we've been with God. And let them know that the Bible is a Bible to Christians all over the world, but to African Americans, it's one of the first and oldest history books about you as a people. Them tribes was African tribes. Those countries and places in Africa, that's Africa. Back when I was a kid, you turn to the back page of the Bible, the map of Africa was there. It ain't been long since they removed it. and then try to change Egypt and Israel into the Middle East. We all know that's all us. We all know we're the first people. Our children don't. So we just got to teach those things in order to survive, and then engage in our needs together collectively so we can get well and do better as a people. But you must be challenged. You can't be allowed to be that inward because you want to be. You can't be allowed to do that everywhere you want because you want to. We got to stand up to them. We got to challenge them. I mean, think about this, brother. You and I did One Love to save as many of them brothers as we could as a gang, in the gang. But when they came to your church, didn't you see the calming effect on all them dudes, all ages, from teenagers to grown men? They calmed down. They didn't tear up your church. They weren't disrespectful. So I said to them, come down in front of the stage, and they did. And I asked you to come down and pray for them. But I said this to you, these young men got the devil all around their ankles, moving up into their heart and their mind. I need you to pray for them. The minute you started praying, did you notice how many teared up? Because they had never been involved like that. They never been engaged like that. So he had to be working through you at that moment to them, which is the reason when I did gang summits all across America, I did them in a church. I did it from Thursday to Sunday in each church in every city I went to. And the last day, all religion denomination church service in that church. And I never had a problem. One time in all these big cities were off the chain, and I made it back to the hotel in Minnesota every time. Because when God is in the middle, I didn't have a budget for it. I got the budget. I was in harm's way. I didn't get harmed. When God is in the middle. So when we were in your church, he was in the middle. They enjoyed it. They ate together. Many of them represented different gangs. They didn't argue. They didn't fight in that church. And that's when the church knows its power. I said to Bishop Howe, it was Al Flower's sister. She said, Spike, have you seen the damage from the rebellion? I said, no. She said, you need to go look at it. You really need to go look at it. So I drove over there to Calhoun, and I went all the way down Lake Street looking at it. I went up on 38th and I looked at all of that. Then I went over to St. Paul University and I looked at that. I came back over north, I parked on Broadway, and I walked down the street to look at it. I got all the way to Bishop Howe's church. There wasn't a mark on the building. There wasn't a rock. There was no broken glass, nothing burnt. Here's young people, never been to church, never had God, never had a preacher. The church had no mark. That's a sign. That's a sign of what's going to stand because it stood. Stuff was damaged all around it. Not a mark on the church. Not even somebody wrote on a wall. Nothing. Kids that ain't never engaged in God knew something about that building and did not touch that building on Broadway. And I told him to his face, and then he realized it. There wasn't a stone thrown at that church. So there's still hope if the house of God is still here and the men of God are still willing to go forward, then we have our generals to fight this war. This is a verbal war, a teaching war, and a man up war. We have to man up. Last year, brother, oh man, I'm gonna say it because I say it all the time. The Klan has been in operation over 170 years. Black males have now killed more black males than blacks were killed by the Klan in 170 some years. The Vietnam War was 5 years long. We were 7% of the front line. We've now wounded and killed more black men than that war. But last year, we broke a record. Across this country, we killed more than 100,000 black people. This is critical, and it's very, very important that we organize ourselves to challenge. We might have to pray every time we move, but they did that in the civil rights movement. They prayed before they moved. They prayed when white folks were beating them and doing all kinds of stuff. But they won the victory because they stayed with their maker. They didn't move from him. It was painful. The beatings were painful, a lot of loss of life, but they never gave up. And God gave them that victory, and Jim Crow was gone. So here we are again. We must recognize our leaders as spiritual leaders. We must recognize we have to get into war. But remember, this is a spiritual war. Get behind your spiritual generals. Move forward. Put the programs in the church. Move forward. Move to save these women and children and these young men.
You know, I'm glad you mentioned the One Love, because that was truly a move of God. I remember that like it was yesterday. Seeing all those, a church full of people from different gangs, different sects. And, you know, you had that little anxious thing going on within you, but you knew also that God was going to cause a great movement to happen. And when you called them down to the altar, you called every one of them to come to the altar. And you asked me to pray, and I started praying. And trust me, I watch and pray. So I was praying and I was looking too. So I saw the tears in their eyes. And then I knew God was going to do something great that day. And I think we changed the whole environment because we was in the middle of really a gang war at that time.
That's
but
right.
We changed the whole situation.
That's right.
And it happened in the church.
Well, if you remember, Pastor, that Sunday they wanted to come to your church to the service.
They came back to church that Sunday. We did this on a Saturday, but they came back. The church was full that Sunday.
There you go.
And there were many of them who came down to the altar again and who actually joined the church.
But look at the respect they had for you letting them in your home. You see what I'm saying? And they'll never forget it. Many of them who are doing well right now were in that church, that are running programs right now, were in that church that day. I know that for a fact. That are running programs to help these kids right now were in that church, including Trey. We Stand for Peace. They were in that church.
Oh yeah, Trey and I got to be big buddies that day.
There you go. There you go. So I'm just saying that the mark stayed with them. And I have not heard from anybody that one of them that was there that day got killed after that.
That was a wonderful movement.
And it can happen again. You got to have people with the courage and the love of our young people to challenge our young people that way. It can happen again. And it's just that, we got hurt real bad when Ryback was the mayor and Samuels was city council person. And they made the decision that there should be no funds to help these young men stop this. And when they didn't allow that, when it was the size of I'd say a bean, and let that cancer grow till it overwhelmed us, that's what we're dealing with right now. It was allowed to grow. Had they not interfered and stopped that money that would allow them men to stand up, we could have slowed this down. There was too many young men willing to stand up. We just couldn't give them the money and resources to do it.
Wow. Yeah, I remember, and I know because we didn't get the funding. I really think that's led to a lot of stuff that's going on right now. So, yeah. But there was another thing. It just crossed my mind. Right after the death of George Floyd, you brought another group to the church. But it was a group of white folks from outstate Minnesota.
They were from all over the country. They were from all over the country.
A bus load of them came, and they wanted to hear you say exactly what you're saying tonight. They wanted to hear that.
Yeah.
But we had heard from them since. We took them to dinner and everything. But what about that particular? Didn't they come up? All the white folks coming to the church that day?
They went back and started working on different projects to help people Black back in their home states. And I have kept up with them there. Most of them are doing really, really well. And some have came back and forth here. And they were planning another one, a big one here, and then the pandemic hit. But they got busy when they left.
Wow.
And they really appreciate you open the door of that church, because that was a national movement that runs back and forth to the Holy Land and everything else.
Yeah.
And they were huge, a huge group. Matter of fact, when you saw them before the problem, they were bringing 3,000 people here. And when the problem happened, that's why you only seen a busload. But
you took them all over the community, showed them everything.
Everything.
And then brought them to the church and then closed it out there. Then we took them out to
dinner.
To dinner. I'm trying to think, we took them up on 38.
Right.
Yeah.
That black restaurant.
The black restaurant. And they
but the minds was changed in that house of God right there.
Right there.
And they let me choose the church, and I chose yours, and then we went from there. And I'm telling you, they've done a lot of good work. I've been together with the ones in New York, the ones in Atlanta since that time. Everybody's moving. And they came back here. There was a program for young people over on Nicollet earlier last year, and some of them was with me when we went to that program.
Wow.
And that was at that Jamaica restaurant over there.
our time is winding down. So, but I did want to at least get to the point where you can talk some about not only your civil rights action or your activism, but a lot of people don't know your relationship you had with the music movement here in Minneapolis, particularly with Prince. Can you talk to us about that and the movie that's coming out, or the movie that may be out? Can you talk
Yeah,
about
there's about 4 movies I've been working on. One is out though. But what happened was Bobby Lau was our greatest jazz musician. And he went to Japan to participate in the Yamaha organ contest, and he won. When you win, you get a $10,000 organ and a record deal. The conversation was, congratulations, Bobby, but there'll never be no little Bobbies unless you help us build this music school. He then said, well, why me? He said, because jazz musicians read music at other levels beyond other musicians. They're real musicians. They write different. They think different. Most of them play 6 to 7 instruments. I said, we want that for our kids. And that's how we started that school in the back room of the Way. And then out of that first group of youngsters, we created a band called the Young Players, which should have signed with Motown. They came here twice to get them, but they didn't go. When we got that second group, the greatest musician we ever developed, his name was Sonny Thompson. He came through and we created, at that time, we were creating 8 to 9 bands a year, and they were the best band, called The Family. And so when Prince and them came, 12 and whatever, Andre Simone, Terry Lewis and Jimmy and them, 13, 14, Sonny was the lead teacher. And so Craig Peterson, who learned first from Jerry Hubbard, who was brought there by Bobby Lau, he was the best guitar player we had. He taught Sonny. Sonny became the best of all of them. Prince got to learn between Sonny and Craig Peterson, sitting right in the middle of them. He had to be the best, because once you learn jazz, you will be the best, because you can take that music into any genre and just blow it up. And so he learned like that, but so did the rest of them. So then I started doing festivals out there on Plymouth Avenue. The first one I did was Juneteenth. The second one I did was Youth Appreciation Day. And the big one I did was at the Phyllis Wheatley Park, called the Northside Summer Fun Fest, where I would pair our kids up in a show where they play with some of the biggest stars in America, and our kids get to see them and shine in front of their parents. And the whole show was free, just like the other shows. And I did that music for 18 and a half years. One of the biggest thing I did for girls was Miss Black Minnesota. I owned the franchise from the state of Minnesota, but I also bought a franchise to the National Miss Black America. Also created what's called the Little Miss Northside for the little girls. At the same time, I had girls dance groups. I had boys dance groups. I had the Leo Johnson drum corps with majorettes. I had football, boxing, basketball. All these things were going on. Black history. Our school was Operation Chain Gang, each one teach one. We just did all kinds of things to uplift these children, take them to another level. The Legal Rights Center came out of the way, right out of the way. William A. Dixon and Doug Hall. And I'm just saying that the music was so great. We were traveling on the chitlin circuit around this country for years while they were all 13, 14, 15 years old, 8 to 9 bands a year. One of the greatest things I've ever embarked on. And they did a book that's called Purple Snow. You can pick up Purple Snow, and in the back, there's albums of all the music that didn't get out of here. And that's important because Minnesota, a lot of the record companies were born out of what is it called, Polygram and Polydor. They came out of them companies, but we couldn't get a break here. It was given to Bob Dylan. It was given to the Monkees and the Beach Boys, but never the black bands. The biggest record distributor was Pickwick, right out there on 394, half a block up from the Cadillac lot. We couldn't get our records out. So in the back of it is all these albums of the music that the world never got to hear. The other issue about it was Florida that came and did a movie called The Minnesota Sound. So I did that movie first. And then it was Toronto that did a movie, which you can pull up in your phone, called Mr. Nelson in the North Side. You can see the trailer, and you can also punch over $8 and you can see the movie either in your phone or your computer. I also did a movie coming out called The North Side from a group in LA, and the director, he's from Tampa. Spike Lee, when you did Floyd's thing at your church, Spike Lee's best friend, that's who was sitting next to me. He wants to do a movie on my life. And the brother that did the movie Black Skin in LA, he wants to do a movie on my life. And the same guy that did Prince, he wants to do a movie on my life. So I've been working on these different movies and moving forward so my history won't die of the things that I engaged in. You know, some of my Golden Glove fighters were champions. I even had pro fighters. I had a semi-pro football team, not just kids. I had adult bowling teams. I mean, anything you could think of that brought our people together were the things I was doing. At the same time, I was doing civil rights, human rights, and police brutality cases. Same time, I was speaking all over the country. One of the things that came from that was when the Million Man March came, I was asked by Ben Shavers, who was the coordinator of it, to be on the staff of the Million Man March and help bring the Midwest to the Million Man March. That was a great chapter of my life. But I've spoke all over the country. I've had my own TV show here. I had my own newspaper column here. And I had my own radio show on KMOJ for years. So I had a great life of teaching young people. I did 39 years of 3 prisons a week in Minnesota. I also did federal penitentiary here, Sandstone and Rochester. I also did state and federal penitentiaries across the country for years. I did gang summits where I announced it in Washington, D.C. If you need a gang summit, you can reach me in Minnesota. And they reached me from all over the country, and I did gang summits. But most of my work engaged, the last thing I've been on is the National Coalition Against Racism in Sports and Media. And I have traveled for the Native Americans to speak on that issue. Last year, we won 2 big victories. One was to make the Redskins change their name, and the other was to get Cleveland to change the Cleveland Indians. But we're not done with that yet. I will still continue to travel and speak for them on behalf of them about racism in sports and media.
Well, Spike, I tell you, you got a very rich history. And I know tonight that a lot of people have learned a lot of things about you. And I appreciate the work you've done over the years. I want you to know I really appreciate you, and this community really needs to appreciate you for all the things you've done. And we're certainly going to be reaching back out to you to take some things further. We hope somebody got some ideas tonight of things we can start to do now in our community to make our community a better, safer place. Because if there's ever been a time that Black people need to stand up as one, that time is now. And truly say we are better together when we do it together. That's the only way we're going to make a difference in our community. We must come together and do it together, not fight each other, but fight for each other.
You said it best, one love.
One love. There you go. So we appreciate you. We thank you. And God bless you. And I'm quite sure that a lot of people have been blessed tonight. And we'll be reaching back out to you.
All right.
I'll call you tomorrow.
Have a great evening.
All right. Y'all do the same. Good night, everyone. We'll see you